This photo of two friends looked perfectly innocent. That is, until historians stumbled upon a dark secret hidden just beneath the surface. Dr. Natalie Chin carefully adjusted the settings on her high-resolution digital scanner. She was getting ready to process another batch of daguerreotypes from the museum's newly acquired Montgomery collection. As the senior curator of photography at the National Museum of American History, a position she was incredibly proud of, she'd looked at thousands upon thousands of historical images over her career. Still, the next photograph in line stopped her in her tracks. The photo, which was from 1853, showed two teenage girls sitting nicely next to each other on a beautiful bench on a plantation veranda. On the left was a white girl, who seemed to be about 14 years old. Her blonde hair was carefully arranged in ringlets, and she was wearing a formal Victorian dress with beautiful lace. Next to her was a black girl, who looked to be about 15. She was also wearing a pretty dress, but it wasn't as fancy. Still, it was elegant, especially since she was probably enslaved. "What an unusual picture for that time," Natalie said quietly, noticing how close the two girls were. Back then, photos of white and black people together usually showed who was in charge. Masters and servants were never equals, and they certainly didn't sit on the same bench. She carefully put the delicate photo in the scanner. The Montgomery collection was famous for its unique look at life in the South before the Civil War, and this photo had been in a few books as a rare example of friendship between races in Louisiana. When the clear digital image showed up on her screen, Natalie zoomed in to check the quality. She carefully looked at every part of the photo, writing down notes about how to best preserve it. But when she got to the bottom of the image, something strange caught her eye. There was a metallic object partly hidden under the black girl's dress. "Wait a minute," she said quietly to herself. She changed the contrast and sharpness to make the detail clearer. What looked like an anklet or a shoe buckle was actually something much more disturbing. It was a fancy metal shackle made to look like jewelry. There was no mistaking it. It was attached to the girl's ankle. Natalie felt a chill. The heartwarming image of friendship had suddenly become something dark and unsettling, a shocking picture of captivity hidden as companionship. "Dr. Whitaker needs to see this right away," she said. Her voice was barely audible in the empty lab. That night, as she went through her notes, Natalie couldn't forget the haunted look in the black girl's eyes. What seemed like proper Victorian stoicism now looked like the suffering of someone held captive, hidden for over 170 years. The museum's huge archives were in a temperature-controlled basement, a maze of history carefully organized in acid-free boxes and labeled drawers. Natalie spent the morning looking for any papers about the Montgomery plantation photo. "Here it is," she whispered, pulling out a yellowed folder with the original notes from 1972, when the museum first got the photo from the Montgomery family. The letter with it called the photo Caroline Montgomery with her companion Harriet, 1853. Dr. James Whitaker, the museum's director of historical research, looked over her shoulder, interested in Natalie's discovery. "Companion? That's a very nice way to put it. Look at this," Natalie said, pointing to a note on the original listing. "The family said Harriet was a favorite house servant who was treated almost like family." "A common excuse," James said dryly, clearly skeptical. "Have you found anything about the ankle restraint?" "Nothing. It's not in any of the papers." "I don't think anyone even noticed it before," she said. They kept going through financial records and plantation inventories from the Montgomery collection. Among the cold listings of people treated as property, they found an entry from 1851 that said, "Purchased girl, age 13, $800. Intended companion for Miss Caroline." "Intended companion," James repeated slowly. "That's very specific." In a diary from Elizabeth Montgomery, Caroline's mother, they found a more detailed note. "Acquired a suitable companion for Caroline today. The girl is well-mannered and speaks well. Caroline is delighted with her new friend, though we have taken precautions to ensure she remains reliable. Thomas has crafted a special arrangement that is both secure and befitting of her particular position." Natalie felt sick at the casual cruelty of it all. "The special arrangement. They're describing the shackle as if it were a privilege," she exclaimed. More entries revealed even more disturbing details about this unsettling arrangement. Caroline and Harriet spent the afternoon reading together. Harriet's education is proving to be quite useful, though we must be careful not to let her forget her place. The gold filigree was a good choice, elegant enough for her to be seen with Caroline in public. "This is worse than I thought," Natalie said quietly. She wasn't just enslaved. She was forced to perform friendship, all while chained. "A pet slave for a lonely plantation daughter," James said grimly. "We need to look for other examples. If this happened on the Montgomery plantation, it probably happened elsewhere too." The National Archives in Washington, D.C., had thousands of stories from formerly enslaved people collected during the Federal Writers Project in the 1930s. Natalie arranged for research access, hoping to find any mention of Harriet or similar companion arrangements on other plantations. After searching through digitized records for days, she found something remarkable. It was an interview with an elderly woman named Harriet Johnson, recorded in Chicago in 1937. Her birth year and Louisiana origins matched the girl in the photo. "Listen to this," Natalie said to James, who was helping her with the research. "I was purchased special to be a friend to the daughter, Miss Caroline. They dressed me fine and taught me to read some, even though it was against the law. But don't let that fool you about kindness. I wore a gold chain on my ankle for 4 long years, only removed when I was safely locked in my room at night." James leaned forward, excited. "That has to be her," he said. The narrative continued. "They called it my special bracelet. Said it was a privilege to wear gold when other slaves wore iron. But a chain is a chain, no matter how pretty it might look. Miss Caroline, she liked to pretend we were true friends. Maybe she even believed it. But friends don't own friends." Harriet described how she had to speak properly, dress elegantly, and go everywhere with Caroline, from meals to social events to lessons. She was displayed as proof of the Montgomery family's enlightened treatment of their enslaved people, while the decorative shackle made sure she couldn't escape. "The photographer came for Miss Caroline's 14th birthday," the narrative continued. "They dressed me in one of my finest dresses, still quite plain compared to hers, and posed us together. Miss Caroline was proud of that picture, said it showed how special our friendship was. She never saw that the chain on my ankle told the real story." The account told of Harriet's escape during the Civil War. She fled north, married, raised children, and shared her story with the Federal Writers Project interviewer decades later. "She survived to tell her story," Natalie said softly, feeling connected to the girl in the photo. "Now, we can make sure it's heard." The last part of Harriet's story struck Natalie deeply. People today might look at the picture and see 2 girls being friends, not knowing that one was the property of the other. That's how slavery worked. Sometimes it dressed itself up pretty, but underneath, there were always chains. The discovery of Harriet's narrative energized Natalie's research. If one companion arrangement was documented, others probably existed too. She assembled a research team, including Dr. Marcus Johnson, an expert on enslavement, and Emily Parker, a digital imaging specialist. Do we need to re-examine every supposedly friendly photograph of enslaved and free people together? Natalie asked at their first meeting, specifically looking at the lower parts of images that might have been cropped in published versions. They developed an algorithm to scan the museum's archives for similar visual patterns, especially formal portraits of Black and white people close together, especially children and young women. "We've identified 43 potential matches," Emily reported 2 weeks later, with a tablet of images. "In 7, we can see disguised restraints, decorative shackles, chains masked as jewelry, and even a gold ribbon that is a thin metal band tied tightly around an ankle." Marcus nodded, examining the evidence. "This fits with my research on companionate enslavement. Enslaved children were forced to be emotional companions to white children. The psychological cruelty is staggering," he said. Natalie observed, "forcing someone to perform friendship while keeping them in bondage." Their findings went beyond photography. Marcus found plantation records from Georgia, Virginia, and the Carolinas with references to companion acquisitions and appropriate restraint practices for house companions. A diary from a Virginia plantation mistress was revealing. Purchased a bright girl for Mary's companion. Had the silversmith craft an attractive chain that won't embarrass us when they appear together in society. The Blackmores were impressed with our arrangement and are seeking a companion for their daughter. It was a status symbol, Marcus explained. Having an elegantly dressed, well-spoken, enslaved companion for your daughter showed wealth and supposed benevolence, while maintaining control. The team discovered these arrangements were common for plantation daughters isolated on rural estates, with few social opportunities. Enslaved companions filled this void, but ownership was maintained through visible, yet disguised, restraints. These weren't exceptions, Natalie concluded. This was a recognized practice hiding in our records and photographs. The conference room was silent as Natalie finished presenting her team's findings to the museum's exhibition committee. The image of Harriet and Caroline was on the screen, showing the shackle. This changes how we display this photograph, Natalie concluded, and potentially dozens of others in our collection. Richard Townsend, the museum's senior director, looked troubled. This is powerful research, Dr. Chun, but we need to consider the implications. He continued, the Montgomery collection was donated with funding for preservation and exhibition. The Montgomery family sit on our board. All the more reason to be truthful, Natalie countered. This isn't just about a photo. It's about correcting a fundamental misrepresentation of history. Dr. Eliza Washington, head of African American History Collections, leaned forward. I agree with Natalie. We have a responsibility to present these images accurately, especially with Harriet's testimony. Anything less would perpetuate the erasure of her experience. The debate continued for hours. Some worried about donor relationships and controversy. Others worried about reinterpreting established narratives. The marketing team fretted about public relations. What would you propose? Richard asked Natalie. A special exhibition called Hidden in Plain Sight, she responded, centered on the Montgomery photograph, but including the others we've identified. We present the original interpretations alongside what we now understand, including the disguised restraints, the forced companionship, and Harriet's own words. Eliza nodded. We could include interactive elements where visitors discover the hidden details themselves, just as Natalie did. It would be powerful learning about how history can be obscured. And we include modern parallels, added Marcus, how exploitation can hide behind benevolent facades. Now, we need to look much more carefully at historical narratives that seem far too comfortable. Richard sighed, weighing institutional politics against scholarly integrity. The Montgomery family will need to be informed before we proceed, he said. Of course, Natalie agreed. But they should be presented with our findings as established historical fact, not as a point of negotiation. The evidence is absolutely clear and compelling. As the meeting adjourned, Natalie lingered, staring intently at the projected image of Harriet. We owe her this truth, she said quietly, though no one remained in the room to hear her. The elegant conference room at the law offices of Hartwell and Reed featured rich mahogany paneling and stern-faced portraits of men in expensive suits. Natalie sat beside Director Townsend, facing 3 representatives of the Montgomery family and their attorney. This is preposterous, declared Eleanor Montgomery Williams, a silver-haired woman in her 70s. You're defaming my ancestors based solely on a shadow in an old photograph. Natalie calmly opened her tablet and displayed the enhanced image. It's not a shadow, Ms. Montgomery Williams. It's clearly a decorative restraint, and we have Harriet's own testimony describing it in painstaking detail. Oh, some interview with some old woman who merely claimed to be this Harriet person. How can you possibly verify that it's even her? The woman scoffed. The details match precisely. The dates, the names, the location, even the specific description of the gold filigree restraint, Natalie explained patiently. Additionally, we found your great-great-grandmother's diary entries describing the arrangement. Eleanor blanched slightly at this particular revelation. Richard attempted a bit of diplomacy. We understand that this is difficult information to process. The museum isn't attempting to single out your family in any way. We've actually discovered that similar practices were relatively common. My ancestors were respected members of Louisiana society, Eleanor insisted. They treated their people well for the times. With all due respect, Marcus interjected, having joined the meeting as their historical expert. Forcing a young girl to pretend friendship while simultaneously keeping her shackled is hardly treating someone well by any era's standards. The Montgomery family's attorney cleared his throat rather theatrically. The donation agreement clearly gives the family certain rights regarding how these materials are displayed. We could certainly pursue an injunction, if necessary. You could, Richard acknowledged, but that would merely delay the inevitable. Dr. Chen's research is academically sound and will be published regardless. The question is whether your family wishes to be part of an honest historical reckoning or simply prefers to be seen as attempting to suppress the truth. A younger Montgomery relative, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Grandmother, perhaps we should consider a different approach. Times have certainly changed since the collection was first donated. After some rather tense negotiations, a compromise ultimately emerged. The Montgomery family wouldn't block the exhibition, but would be allowed to include a statement acknowledging that, while their ancestors did participate in a morally unacceptable system, they were also very much products of their time and place. As they left the meeting, Eleanor stopped Natalie. You think that you're doing something noble, but you're just stirring up painful history that is better left buried. Natalie met her gaze steadily. Harriet couldn't tell her story while she was chained, but she lived to make absolutely sure that it was recorded. Don't you think that she deserves to be heard now? With the Montgomery family negotiations behind them, Natalie's team focused intently on expanding their research efforts. The museum had officially approved the exhibition, which was scheduled to open in just 6 short months. Now, they needed to build a more comprehensive understanding of the companion slave practice. Look at this, Emily called from her workstation. She had been meticulously analyzing a collection of letters between plantation families. There's an entire correspondence between the Montgomerys and the Whitfield family in Georgia about the companionship arrangement. They were essentially sharing tips. The letters revealed a network of elite families who had readily adopted similar practices. Elizabeth Montgomery had apparently pioneered the decorative restraint concept, which was subsequently copied by other plantation mistresses who saw it as a refined solution to their companion management challenges. Marcus had been diligently tracking financial records. I found specialized purchases from jewelers and silversmiths entries specifically for decorative anklets and companion bracelets. Some even include design specifications to ensure that they couldn't be removed without a key. The team discovered that these arrangements were most common among wealthy families with daughters between the ages of 10 and 16. The enslaved companions were typically slightly older than the white children they served, carefully selected for their intelligence and appearance, and often given unusual privileges, such as fine clothing and basic literacy, always with the underlying control maintained through physical restraints and psychological manipulation. It's a particularly gendered form of enslavement, observed Dr. Washington as she reviewed their findings. These girls were expected to provide not just service, but also emotional labor, to appear genuinely attached to their enslavers. In auction records, they found evidence that enslaved children who were advertised as suitable companions commanded significantly higher prices. Some listings specifically mentioned well-mannered, refined features, or pleasing temperament euphemisms for children who could convincingly perform the role of a true friend. Most disturbingly, they found photographs of plantation daughters with their companions featured prominently in family albums, presented as clear evidence of the family's supposedly benevolent treatment of their enslaved people. In many cases, the restraints were carefully positioned to remain just out of frame or disguised as decorative elements. They weren't really hiding these arrangements, Natalie realized. They were actually proud of them. They saw them as enlightened, the ultimate display of power, Marcus added. Not just owning someone's body, but claiming ownership of their emotions and relationships. 2. Forcing them to simulate friendship while ensuring that they could never, ever forget that they were nothing more than mere property. This understanding added additional layers of complexity to their exhibition planning. It wasn't just about exposing hidden restraints in old photographs, but also about revealing an entire system of emotional exploitation that had been carefully obscured by sanitized historical narratives. The research team expanded their search far beyond the museum's own collections, reaching out to other institutions and private archives across the country. Their inquiries generated both significant interest and some resistance, as curators and collectors grappled with the implications for their own historical photographs. The Historical Society of Louisiana has identified 3 more images with similar characteristics, reported Emily during their weekly progress meeting. And they found an estate inventory that specifically lists companion restraints among the valuables. As word of their project spread through academic circles, Natalie began receiving emails from researchers who had noticed similar anomalies, but hadn't really understood their full significance. A clear pattern was rapidly emerging across the South, particularly concentrated among the wealthiest plantation families. Dr. Washington had been conducting oral history research, reviewing interviews with formerly enslaved people for any mentions of companion arrangements. I found 11 accounts that describe similar situations, though not all of them specifically mentioned the decorative restraints. Some talk about being locked in at night, or about wearing specific tokens that marked them as belonging to the daughter of the house. The most powerful breakthrough came when they located a descendant of another companion, a woman named Gloria Thompson, whose great-great-grandmother, Rachel, had been forced into a similar arrangement with the daughter of a Virginia tobacco planter. "My grandmother passed down Rachel's story," Gloria explained during their recorded interview. "How she had to dress up and play with little Miss Charlotte every single day, but wasn't allowed to speak to the other enslaved children because she might pick up their common ways. She slept on a pallet in Miss Charlotte's room, chained to the bed frame every night." Gloria had preserved a small object, a decorative gold cuff with an internal locking mechanism that had been passed down through generations. Rachel kept this after she escaped during the war. Said she never wanted her children to forget what pretty things could hide. The cuff was nearly identical to the one visible in the Montgomery photograph, definitively confirming that these were manufactured items, not one-off creations. As their research database continued to grow rapidly, they ultimately identified over 60 clear examples of the practice spanning from the 1830s to the Civil War, heavily concentrated among elite families in Virginia, Georgia, and Louisiana. The physical evidence, combined with written and oral testimonies, painted a comprehensive picture of a widespread, yet previously unrecognized, aspect of slavery's devastating psychological control. Each and every one of these photographs tells the very same story, Natalie observed as she meticulously reviewed their collection. A story of friendship that wasn't really friendship at all, of chains that were cleverly disguised as jewelry, of childhood stolen and replaced with forced performance. The exhibition was rapidly taking shape, not just as a revelation about hidden restraints in old photographs, but as a truly powerful exploration of how history itself can so easily conceal its darkest aspects behind seemingly innocent images. The National Museum of American History buzzed with anticipation on opening night of Hidden in Plain Sight, Captive Companions. Media representatives, academics, and members of the general public filled the specially designed gallery space where the groundbreaking exhibition was being housed. The centerpiece was an enlarged version of the Montgomery plantation photograph, complete with interactive lighting that illuminated the cleverly disguised shackle whenever visitors pressed a button. Around it, similar photographs were displayed, their hidden restraints revealed through careful enhancement and thoughtful presentation. Beside each and every image were the stories of the enslaved girls, meticulously drawn from plantation records, diary entries, and, most powerfully, the oral histories of the women who had lived through this horrific experience. The exhibition also featured examples of the decorative restraints themselves, including the gold cuff that had been passed down through Gloria Thompson's family. The effect was chilling. Visitors walked through the gallery in hushed silence, their faces etched with a mixture of shock, disbelief, and profound sadness. As Natalie watched the crowds, she knew that their team had accomplished what they had set out to do. They had brought a hidden history into the light, forcing people to confront the uncomfortable truths about slavery's legacy. The Montgomery family representatives attended the opening night, standing quietly in a corner of the gallery, their expressions unreadable. Eleanor Montgomery Williams stared intently at the enlarged photograph of Harriet and Caroline, perhaps finally beginning to understand the full scope of the tragedy that had unfolded on her family's plantation. "We have received an overwhelmingly positive response to the exhibition," Richard Townsend told Natalie a few weeks later. "The media coverage has been extensive, and attendance numbers are exceeding all expectations. More importantly, people are engaging in thoughtful conversations about the complexities of slavery and its enduring impact on American society." The exhibition sparked a national dialogue, prompting other museums and historical societies to re-examine their own collections and interpretations of historical photographs. Natalie and her team were invited to speak at conferences and universities across the country, sharing their research and inspiring others to pursue similar lines of inquiry. The legacy of Hidden in Plain Sight extended far beyond the walls of the National Museum of American History. It served as a powerful reminder that history is never truly settled and that there are always new stories waiting to be uncovered. But most importantly, it honored the memory of Harriet Johnson and the countless other enslaved companions whose stories had been silenced for far too long. Historical records, diaries, and, when feasible, their own personal testimonies were all incorporated into the exhibit. Harriet's narrative held a place of prominence, her own words presented in elegant typography right next to the photograph in which she had been so brutally forced to pose as Caroline's friend. "We're not just showing what was hidden in these photographs," Natalie clarified to a reporter from the Washington Post. "We're revealing how history itself can actually conceal disturbing truths behind seemingly innocent images." These girls were required to perform friendship while simultaneously being physically restrained and emotionally manipulated. Gloria Thompson's family heirloom, the golden restraint cuff, was included in the exhibition, displayed in a central case. Visitors had the opportunity to closely examine its ornate exterior and the hidden locking mechanism that transformed what appeared to be a simple piece of jewelry into a tool of captivity. A digital interactive station allowed people to examine unaltered historical photographs and discover the hidden restraints for themselves, creating powerful moments of revelation akin to Natalie's original discovery. The exhibition also featured contemporary commentary on how historical narratives are constructed, challenged, and revised as new evidence comes to light. Reactions were both powerful and varied. Some visitors openly wept as they read the deeply personal testimonies. Others engaged in intense discussions about historical memory and responsibility. A few descendants of plantation families expressed discomfort or defensiveness, while descendants of enslaved people thanked the museum profusely for finally telling this previously hidden story. Eleanor Montgomery Williams attended with several younger family members, though she maintained a stoic expression throughout the evening. Natalie noticed one of the younger Montgomerys openly crying in front of Harriet's testimony. Most powerfully, descendants of identified companions had been invited as honored guests. Gloria Thompson stood proudly beside the case containing her ancestors' restraint, explaining its full significance to visitors. "Rachel wanted us to remember," she told them, "not to hold on to bitterness, but to recognize truth whenever others try to disguise it." As the evening drew to a close, Director Townsend approached Natalie. The board chairman called it the most significant historical reframing the museum has undertaken in decades. He smiled slightly. "Worth all the controversy, wouldn't you say?" Natalie watched as a young black girl studied Harriet's photograph intently. "Absolutely worth it," she said. 1 year after the exhibition initially opened, Natalie sat in her office reviewing its overall impact. Hidden in Plain Sight had traveled to 7 major museums across the country, sparking similar research projects and reevaluations of historical photography collections nationwide. The academic paper that she had co-authored with Marcus and Dr. Washington had been published in the esteemed American Historical Review, generating both acclaim and some productive debate. Over 40 additional companion photographs had been identified by other researchers using their meticulously developed methodology, creating a more comprehensive understanding of what had once been an all-but-invisible practice. Most significantly, the project had inspired a broader movement to re-examine seemingly benign historical narratives and images for hidden evidence of oppression and resistance. Museums and universities were actively developing new protocols for analyzing historical photographs, looking far beyond the obvious to find the stories that were often concealed in the seemingly innocuous details and margins. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. A young intern entered carrying a small package. "This was delivered for you, Dr. Chen, from someone named Eliza Montgomery." Natalie immediately recognized the name as one of Eleanor's granddaughters, who had been visibly moved at the exhibition opening. Inside the package was a leather-bound volume and a note. "Dr. Chen, I found this among Grandmother Eleanor's effects after her passing last month. It's Caroline's, Montgomery's personal diary, dating back to either 1853 or 1855. I really think it belongs with your research, not gathering dust up in our attic." Eliza looked on as Natalie, with the utmost care, gently opened the delicate diary. Caroline's youthful handwriting covered the pages, chronicling her days with Harriet. The entries painted a picture of a complicated relationship, showing moments of real affection right next to some really disturbing expressions of ownership and control. It was like Caroline was both a friend and a jailer. Her views were molded by a society that taught her that owning another person was just normal. One entry really jumped out. "Harriet seemed sad today. I told her she should be thankful she gets to be my friend instead of working out in the fields like the others. She didn't say anything, but I saw her touch her ankle chain when she thought I wasn't looking. Sometimes I wish she didn't have to wear it, but Mother says it's necessary. I gave her a ribbon to tie around it to make it prettier." Natalie closed the diary, really feeling the weight of what it meant. This was the final piece of the puzzle, Caroline's side of the story, adding another layer to everything they thought they knew. It wasn't just a simple story about good guys and bad guys, but a complicated human tragedy where even the people who seemed to have it all were twisted by a system that was just plain cruel at its core. She knew she had to add the diary to their growing collection of companion documents, making sure that both Harriet's and Caroline's voices were heard. This was what their work was really about, not just exposing the chains that were hidden, but showing the full humanity of everyone involved, all trapped in different ways by the terrible chains of history. As she carefully placed the diary in an archival box, Natalie thought back to the photograph that had started it all. A picture that seemed so harmless at first, but once you really saw it, you could never look at it the same way again. Just like history itself. The exhibit meticulously incorporated historical records, personal diaries, and, whenever possible, the searing personal testimonies of those directly involved. Harriet's story was front and center, her own words displayed in an elegant font, positioned right alongside that haunting photograph where she'd been so brutally forced to pose as if she were Caroline's friend. "We're doing more than just showcasing what's hidden in these photographs," Natalie emphasized to a reporter from the Washington Post. "We're actually revealing how history itself can bury deeply disturbing truths beneath images that appear, on the surface, to be perfectly innocent." These young women were compelled to act out a charade of friendship while simultaneously being subjected to physical restraints and insidious emotional manipulation. Gloria Thompson's family's precious heirloom, a golden restraint cuff, was a key component of the exhibit, displayed prominently in a central case. Visitors were given the opportunity to closely scrutinize its elaborately decorated exterior and the cleverly concealed locking mechanism, a feature that transformed what seemed to be a simple piece of jewelry into a cruel instrument of captivity. An interactive digital station was set up to allow people to delve into the unaltered historical photographs, giving them the chance to discover the hidden restraints firsthand. This created powerful, visceral moments of revelation, echoing Natalie's own initial discovery. The exhibition also featured incisive contemporary commentary on how historical narratives are constructed, challenged, and continually revised as new evidence surfaces. Reactions to the exhibit were intense and incredibly diverse. Some visitors were moved to tears as they read through the deeply personal, heart-wrenching testimonies. Others became engrossed in intense debates about historical memory and the weight of responsibility. A few descendants of plantation-owning families expressed feelings of discomfort or defensiveness, while descendants of enslaved individuals expressed their profound gratitude to the museum for finally bringing this previously suppressed story to light. Eleanor Montgomery Williams attended the exhibit accompanied by several younger members of her family, although she maintained a stoic, almost unreadable expression throughout the evening. Natalie noticed one of the younger Montgomerys openly weeping as she stood in front of Harriet's powerful testimony. Perhaps most significantly, descendants of identified companions were invited to attend as honored guests. Gloria Thompson stood tall and proud beside the display case holding her ancestors' restraint, carefully explaining its full significance to the captivated visitors. Rachel wanted us to remember, she told them, her voice filled with emotion, not to cling to bitterness, but to always recognize the truth, especially when others try to disguise it or bury it. As the evening began to wind down, Director Townsend approached Natalie with a pleased look on his face. The board chairman called it the most significant historical reframing the museum has undertaken in decades, he said, a slight smile playing on his lips. Worth all the controversy, wouldn't you say? Natalie watched as a young black girl studied Harriet's photograph with intense focus. Absolutely worth it, she replied, without hesitation. A year after the exhibition first opened its doors, Natalie sat at her office, carefully reviewing its overall impact and far-reaching consequences. Hidden in plain sight, had traveled to 7 major museums across the country, igniting similar research projects and prompting widespread reevaluations of historical photography collections nationwide. The academic paper that she had co-authored with Marcus and Dr. Washington had been published in the highly esteemed American Historical Review, generating both critical acclaim and some productive, thought-provoking debate within the academic community. More than 40 additional companion photographs had been identified by other researchers who utilized their meticulously developed methodology. This led to a much more comprehensive and nuanced understanding of what had once been a largely invisible and unspoken practice. But most significantly, the project had sparked a broader movement aimed at re-examining seemingly harmless historical narratives and images, searching for hidden evidence of oppression and resistance. Museums and universities were actively involved in developing new protocols for analyzing historical photographs, encouraging a deeper dive beyond the obvious to uncover the stories that were often cleverly concealed in seemingly innocuous details and the forgotten margins of the frame. A sudden knock at her office door interrupted her train of thought. A young intern entered, carefully carrying a small package. "This was delivered for you, Dr. Chen, from someone named Eliza Montgomery." Natalie immediately recognized the name as belonging to one of Eleanor's granddaughters, the young woman who had been visibly moved during the exhibition opening. Inside the package, she found a leather-bound volume and a handwritten note. "Dr. Chen," the note read, "I found this among Grandmother Eleanor's belongings after her passing last month. It's Caroline's, Montgomery's personal diary, dating back to either 1853 or 1855. I really think it belongs with your research, rather than just gathering dust in our attic." Eliza watched with bated breath as Natalie, with the utmost care and reverence, gently opened the fragile diary. Caroline's youthful, elegant handwriting filled the pages, meticulously chronicling her daily life with Harriet. The entries painted a complex portrait of a deeply troubled relationship, revealing moments of genuine affection juxtaposed with disturbing expressions of ownership and control. It was as if Caroline existed as both a friend and a jailer. Her worldview had been shaped by a society that taught her that owning another human being was simply normal. One particular entry stood out with unsettling clarity. "Harriet seemed sad today. I told her she should be thankful that she gets to be my friend instead of having to work out in the fields like the others." She didn't say anything in response, but I saw her subtly touch her ankle chain when she thought I wasn't looking. "Sometimes I wish she didn't have to wear it, but Mother says it's absolutely necessary." I gave her a ribbon to tie around it to make it prettier. Natalie carefully closed the diary, feeling the immense weight of its significance settle upon her. This was the final piece of the puzzle, Caroline's perspective on the story, adding yet another layer of complexity to everything they thought they understood. It wasn't just a simplistic narrative of good versus evil, but a deeply complex human tragedy where even those who appeared to have it all were ultimately warped and corrupted by a system that was fundamentally cruel at its core. She knew instinctively that she had to add the diary to their growing collection of companion documents, ensuring that both Harriet's and Caroline's voices would be heard and acknowledged. This was, after all, what their work was truly about, not just exposing the chains that had been hidden from view, but also revealing the full humanity of everyone involved, all of whom were trapped in different ways by the terrible, enduring chains of history. As she carefully placed the diary in an archival box for safekeeping, Natalie's thoughts drifted back to the photograph that had started it all. A seemingly harmless image at first glance, but one that, once you truly saw it for what it was, you could never look at in the same way again. Just like history itself.